Okay.
Sounding good.
Sounding good. Yep, I see myself now. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, so it is 7:04. It is March 31st, which is a Thursday, 2022, and the meeting of the St. Mark Street Park Working Group is called to order. Members present: Landry, Dennington, Nichols Worley, Blanchard, and Farrington. Missing signs. Okay, the first order of business today is the approval or acceptance or editing of the minutes from our last meeting. Do I have emendations?
I reviewed and they looked fine to me.
They look beautiful. Okay, do I have a motion to accept as submitted?
I actually have a few minor ones, if you don't mind.
Okay, go for it, Grant.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a line numbers, but under
That's all right.
description of site visit A, disturbed is spelled incorrectly. So if we could site, or it's actually under
disturbed, right? There's a transposition of the two letters. Okay.
Yeah.
Other suggestions.
Yeah, just a couple of things I want to clarify. So under A, description A, not the sub A, estimates 200 to 250 year range. Just wanted to clarify, I think, Dan, maybe you could confirm that, but I thought you said that there were some more recent ones going to like perhaps late 1800s. So maybe that should be a larger range, or maybe that doesn't matter. I'm not sure.
What I meant was to say that from present all the way back about 200, 250 years.
Oh, okay.
I'll clarify that language.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to. That's what I was trying to say.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Thanks for that.
What about wording that estimates a range from present to 250 years ago or something like that? Just a 250 year range could be from 1500 to 1750. So maybe 2 years. Materials dating back from the present or something like that. How's that?
That sounds good.
Okay.
I think that's clear.
All right.
And that was it for me. So yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
All
James.
right. So with these emendations, do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I make a
So
motion.
moved.
Oh,
Okay. So Andrew moved, and Grant, you want a second?
sure. Second.
Okay, Grant second. Okay, and we'll do a roll call. Landry, aye. Dennington,
Aye.
Nicholas Worley,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
and Farrington.
Hi.
I'm sorry I can't call you Mr. It just is too archaic for me. Sorry. I'll last name you unless anyone objects. How's that? Okay, so unanimously accepted. All right, next item of business is the response from St. Mark's School Administration as applicable. I have not heard anything back from St. Mark's School. Has anyone else?
I guess I just have a quick thing. I checked in with the CFO today to see if there are any updates, and he said basically there are no new updates, but he'll reach out if he has anything new.
Okay. That sounds like, James, I think you froze.
Bill is here and I'm trying to promote him to panelist.
Okay.
So
All right.
I'm doing
You
that.
unfroze.
Sorry, did my connection just cut out?
All
We
right,
can hear
so-
you now, James.
Yes.
Did anyone catch what I said? I can repeat it.
Yes, I think we heard it all, that no new updates, but we will receive new updates if there are new updates. All right, okay, good, thanks.
Marguerite? Sorry, before I'm trying. Oh, did I? Okay, there he is. Now Bill should be here. Sorry. Can't see. There he is.
Yes, I see his name. Thank you for doing this, Andrew. It is a a thankless task always.
Phil, can you hear? Good. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
good. Your video is off.
Yes, I see that. I'll work on it here.
Okay.
Mm,
All right. Well, while you're doing that, we'll catch you up to date. The minutes have been approved with two small editorial suggestions, and the response from St. Mark's School has been there are no updates from the CFO, and there we are on that. All right. Now, shall we move on to agenda item number 3, input from the Southborough Historical Commission as applicable. I recently emailed 2 documents that I received from Kevin Miller this morning, and you should all have a copy of that. I think one is the is part of a Mass General Law. I think it's Part 1, Title 26. That's under Public Health, Chapter 114, Cemeteries and Burials. Did you all receive that as an email within the last hour?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and preservation of ancient burial sites. Okay, so Kevin Miller is now the chair of the Southborough Historical Commission, and he called this document to our attention. If you have feedback
He's
on
also
that.
here as well.
Okay. Maybe if Kevin is interested in speaking, he would do well to address us with his concerns.
I don't see him raising his hand, but okay, there he goes.
It's up.
Here he goes.
Hey there, working group.
Hello, Kevin.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I just sent those 2 documents to Marguerite just as points of information to help clarify some of the things I'd heard you speaking about in your last meeting, particularly with regard to there was the one question about statutes and which statutes were applicable, and this one seemed to me, with the caveat that I'm not an attorney, seemed to apply. That is particularly with the definition. Of course, it's only 2 sentences, even though one of them is rather long. But the second sentence that says, burial place, that the town shall not alienate or appropriate to any other use than that of a burial ground, any tract of land which has been for more than 100 years used as a burial place, and no portion of such burial ground shall be taken for public use without special authority from the general court. Burial place, as referred to in this section, shall include unmarked burial grounds known or suspected to contain the remains of one or more American Indian. And of course, suspected implicates a lot of questions, and it just brings me back to it. When I looked at this, it brought me back to the suspicions that were voiced by the Massachusetts Historical Commission and their recommendations. That second document that I forward along to Marguerite, I found a very interesting read. It's 340 pages, so it requires a commitment of time. But one of the takeaways from that for me, and I thought it would interest the working group, is that what you find when you look at that document, that was
Kevin, just a second. Can you just clarify, just for people who may watch this later,
sure.
The title of the document you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm looking at my screen here. This document is called Preservation Guidelines for Municipally Owned Historic Burial Grounds and Cemeteries, and it was issued by the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Mass DCR. And it's a long read, and you may not have time for it. But one thing I found interesting, because I'm like you, still casting around trying to find a solution to this, was that it points out, in citing various cases of other cemeteries in Massachusetts, that issue that we are all attempting to grapple with is not necessarily unique to Southborough, and that there are other towns, for instance, with fairly centrally located historic burial grounds, where there's some question about what the boundaries are, that the stone walls have been moved or adjusted over the years, or there's been an expansion or a contraction, or let's say a rebuilding of the stone walls, and that there are public ways that pass very close by, right? And there's one section of this document that deals with the cemetery in the town of Douglas. And I found it kind of fascinating. And I don't know if I have because I wasn't expecting to talk, if the reference right at my fingertips. I believe it was on page 213. And it talks about this particular cemetery in Douglas and the fact that there is a road that passes apparently very close to it. It states from 1746, their center cemetery. And, they talk about a main street. And one of the recommendations, the bottom line here for them is that the DCR recommends to maintain the road as is. It should not be widened because of the potential for intruding onto unmarked graves close to the road. And so it struck me as somewhat of an analogous situation that we've got here, because this involves the relocation of a street, moving it, I don't know what the exact amount is, 50 or so feet, again, closer to a very sensitive historic grave site. And so, I just noted that there's some precedent. Other towns have had to grapple with this situation. And in this particular case out in Douglas, they were cautioning, because there's some uncertainty about the boundaries of the graveyard, don't move the road closer to the cemetery, basically, which is, of course, what we're engaged in. I'm not saying it's, kind of an exact match. Maybe the relocation of the road that we're talking about here in Southborough is far enough that it's not a problem. It was just more grist for your mill that I was trying to offer. And I thought that's the cemetery stuff is a more slippery slope, but at least the state statute here on the general law, this, I'm trying to call it up so I have the title of that thing in front of me. Preservation of ancient burial places, to me, seemed unambiguous. So I'm disappointed to hear that you haven't heard back from St. Mark's, because that seems to be the sort of key stumbling block. So thanks, and I'll let you get on with your business.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, very much for your input. I had a question for Dan. I ran into you a little bit more than a week ago, and you were on the triangle of land in question, as was I, and there is the foundation of a building there, which I was not aware of. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
It's not, it abuts the burial ground. I don't know, reviewing and looking at it, and then looking at the meeting that I missed, the tape. It's clearly some structure. I don't know the age of it, but certainly it's partially uncovered, but it's not completely uncovered. But it looks like a foundation. It does not look like a retaining wall. It does not look like it looks like a partial line of a foundation. But again, I'm not over there with a shovel. I'm just kind of poking around. But given the amount of charred debris and rock and glass and brick, particularly brick, it was some kind of structure. What structure that is, I don't know. I don't know if it's in line with what was mentioned that previous meeting, which I think was the March 7th meeting, but it's certainly there. I have not, outside of a few more pieces, I've not been able to collect anything else. And I am working on dating a couple of fragments as well, but that's kind of where, that's where things stand right now. But we won't be able to really determine much more without digging.
Yeah, and this was news to me, but when I saw it, it clearly looks like a piece of foundation with a piece of fireplace that's been upended maybe by the earth moving equipment. I mean, that was my sense of it. I wondered if it was the powder house that had been torn down. I don't know, but it was news to me, and I hadn't seen it on any diagrams or plans, but it looks like a foundation to me. So one more piece of the puzzle here, which is of interest.
Hadn't we, I can't remember who it was who told us that there was potentially a school that was on the property that was later destroyed or moved. Could that be the foundation to it, do you think? I thought it was on the triangle parcel of land, but I could be mistaken.
Possible. It's possible. Again, it's a question. Is it a question that is part of what we should be talking about? I don't know, but it is definitely there, and it definitely makes me curious about what it was or what was there, and much of it has been bulldozed away, but part of the floor and clearly cut stones and field stones as a corner remain there near the wall.
But I would say also that I think almost all of that was underground, and that it may have been superficially underground, but all of it was exposed by the movement of the earth.
The road construction.
Yeah, or I think just the scraping of the topsoil as they were trying to level it, and then the uprooting of the trees. It was right in amongst all of the trees that abutted the burial ground that were cut down.
Yeah. I see that Michael Weisan has his hand raised. Andrew, could you let him in? Or whatever the word is.
Yes, good evening, folks. I can shed a little light on that structure for you because I met with the state archaeologist on site, and he identified it as a 19th, potentially 18th century foundation. The Burnetts had owned that property previous to that, and what it actually pertained to was unclear. It was definitely covered before the excavation, but it was part of their recommendation to pursue what precisely that was. It wasn't the powder house, Marguerite, because that was actually dead center in the old burial ground.
Oh, okay.
That we know from the ground radar survey there. But what that structure was, how it pertains to the rest of the plot, all of that type of stuff would be revealed in any type of archaeological survey. So that's all I had to add.
Okay, thank you. That's useful information. So, any other thoughts on the historical aspect of this that we're dealing with? No?
I think it might almost be good to see if we may be using, because they did this in West Newbury, where they went through and looked at burial records, and they were able to identify some burial records that were not in the old burial ground. And then they were able to actually kind of go through kind of like an end around and then figure out where those burial sites were. And I'm wondering if that's something that we would work with Pilgrim with to see because they would have probably pretty meticulous records. I'm not sure how far, I would imagine they would go back quite a ways. See if maybe that's start cross-referencing who we know is buried versus what the burials are.
And that would be within the known burials within the old burial ground, is that correct?
Well, we would be able to identify if there are names that are not included in the burial, in the old burial ground, right? Those would have to be interned somewhere.
Is Michael's hand up again, or is it simply never gone down?
You just put it down and back up again, so I think
Okay,
there's
so
another
I guess
comment.
that means it's raised. Andrew, could you admit Michael, please?
Hi, I can clarify that too for you. The Southborough Historical Society has all those records. We have a extensive list of people that have known to have been buried in the old burial ground, but whose graves are not known from a location. And that's distinct from the whole list of people that we have that are known to be buried there and that we know where their graves more or less were. The person to talk to about this is our resident expert, Sally Waters. She has an almost encyclopedic knowledge of this. And the Historical Commission and Society in the 70s, when this first came up, did a tremendous amount of research. So they have lists of people known to be buried there, suspected to be buried there, reported to be dead, but not anywhere there. So there's these extensive lists of people, and Sally really is the expert for that. It's a considerable number of folks, and I would recommend talking to her. As you know, she's the vice president of the Historical Society.
Michael, would it be accurate to say then that there's a good chance that there are colonial or European settler graves on that triangle, as well as possible Native American ones?
Who knows? I mean, again, the walls were post-date the burial ground by a considerable period.
Yes.
We know that there are burials on the top portion of it. And again, this is 1727 when the town was just founded. When those walls date from exactly is not known. Yes, I would say it would be pretty safe to presume that there are burials on the periphery that weren't included in there. We don't know that for a fact, other than the section near the townhouse, where we do know for a fact. But because of this whole level of disruption, again, this is why I just would urge that someone step up to the plate, whether it be St. Mark's or the town or CPC, before any of this type of stuff is done, that they do this archaeological survey to find out what exactly is going on there. I mean, the best thing possible would be to find that there are no graves there. But if there are, that really constitutes an entirely different conversation, and I think a entirely different charge of this land. And it also activates the statute, of course, that says that these are, the state law that says that these areas are not to be disturbed, which to me is a pretty potent tool in this discussion. Known or suspected, we've informed the Board of Selectmen long ago that there were suspected graves outside the burial grounds, and yet this project has still continued. So with that, I leave you for the evening, but I do think that this is a subject we can provide you with these lists. You can take a look yourself. Sally, I'm sure, would be happy to take a walking tour there with you guys and show you what she. And I think it would be very valuable to inform the process.
Michael, just either you or Kevin, in a, not saying that I'm recommending it, but if an archaeological dig were done, what's the time frame for that? I mean, how long would it take to get the funding, money, people, say the town did have the will to do it? What would it be? 5 years, 2 years, 6 months?
Well, I started these investigations previously. I
Mhm.
spoke, there's about 4 companies in the state that actually
Yep.
do work. One was too busy to talk about it for the next 3 months, but was very happy to recommend. The others I started to do conversations with and didn't pursue. So the short answer is I don't know. But on the other hand, these companies are in business to make these kind of surveys happen, where there's a road project, the Department of Transportation is constructing. When they did the big dig, for instance, they uncovered all sorts of archaeological evidence. So these companies are there to be responsive. I have those connections, Marguerite. That the state archaeologist recommended. There were 4 firms.
Mhm.
I can forward that to you guys to pursue, and I'm sure they could tell you. They could tell you what the time frame would be. It's certainly not a year, because they need to be more responsive than that. But it's a matter of months, and it's a matter of dollars.
Okay, thank you. That's useful information. I was just thinking if it was something that would be a long-term thing that would take a long time and cost a lot of money, it would be different than if it were something that could be done in less than a year.
Oh, no, definitely less than a year. In effect, and the process itself would not take very long at all. I would imagine they would be able to wind this up within a week or 2. It's actually a fairly brutal form of excavation at this point, with a large excavator and archaeologists there looking for the various remains. They almost strip mine the site inch by 3 inches at a time, 3 inches at a time on a grid pattern, and then reveal it. I think you come to a very quick conclusion there as to what was happening. But as I said, I'll get you this information. If you could reach out to them, I'm sure they would be able to tell you by your next meeting what their ideas of a time frame and cost estimate would be.
All right, and one other question. Is that kind of excavation considered respectful to the burials?
Marguerite, just want to mention, I know that Bill has been raising his hand. The
Oh,
old-fashioned
Bill,
way.
sorry. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that's what
That's
it's
quite
doing.
all right. The question I had is, why hasn't the Historical Commission done this before? It seems to be in the domain of that organization.
Well, I no longer speak for the Historical Commission, but if the chair is there, I think he could respond to that.
Happy to. Oh. Am I there? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was waiting to be promoted or whatever. Sorry, guys. The answer, Bill, I mean, I am fairly new to the Historical Commission, but I will say that this is private property we're talking about. And so undisturbed, when it was forested, there was no need, no cause, no impetus to do any kind of investigation outside the walls. It was a wooded, heavily wooded area. And when when the ground penetrating radar survey was done prior to that, my understanding was that the equipment couldn't be brought into that area, even if it had been desired to do so, because it's too heavily treed. So it's only now when it's been exposed and disturbed that it becomes a concern. Prior to that, it was, again, private property. It remains private property, but heavily wooded, which it now is not.
Okay. One other question. Is there any indication in your historical records that this burial ground was used as a burial ground for more than 100 years?
Well, the old burial ground dates to, I believe, 1820 or 1727. So it's almost 300 years old. And the hanging chad here, the hanging question is, any burials that may be outside the walls and may be to that triangle to the north, obviously would have occurred far longer than 100 years ago.
I think there is one burial outside the wall, facing toward Pilgrim Church, that I'm pretty sure Karen Galligan said they don't put a sidewalk there because they know there's a burial outside of the wall under the grass, next to the road. But I'm not quite clear where that is
I mean,
exactly.
all this for us goes back to, we know and we freely admit what we don't know.
Yeah.
And what we don't know is what's in this parcel. And this is why we, as a commission, consulted the higher authority, which is the State Historical Commission. We got their recommendation in writing, and that's where we're still hanging on to it because we don't have much else to go on. And the progress from our standpoint, unless someone can come up with, and certainly we're not sitting on evidence. If we had it, we would bring it forward. What we do have is the evidence that we had. It was presented to the state. The state made their recommendations, and we've passed them on to the appropriate parties. And it's simply a matter of unfortunately, we don't have anything else to go on except the statutes as they exist and the recommendations of the higher authority, where the state office that is staffed by full-time professionals. And they've made their recommendation, and the private property owner has chosen at this point not to act. And it saddens us, but there's not much else we can do except to continue to indicate what the recommendation was.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And I think there's another issue here under the terms of the not swap, but leasing. As I understand it, once government money has been spent on the parcel, the rules change about whether a person or an entity can call in for a state archaeological survey. If it's private property and the owner doesn't want to do anything, that's one thing. But I think once government money has been spent, then it changes it. So my thought was, if the town had the interest in doing an excavation on property that they don't technically full outright own, would there be legal problems or ramifications of that? I guess, Andrew, you're the attorney. What do you think?
Just as an attorney, don't give off the cuff opinions about things I'm not really an expert on, but I just from the discussion that I've heard so far, I think the most important piece of information to gather is how long would the type of survey that's been talked about, how long would it take? When could it be done? How much money would it cost? So, it's frustrating that we're so, it would be great if we could get some numbers on those three questions before the next meeting.
All right.
I think that leads well. I hope I can jump to the next point on our agenda, which is sort of a discussion of sort of our next steps. Is that an idea I had is that we should come back with something solid written down. So my idea was that we would divvy up, if we can, divvy up individual research, and then during an open meeting, collate our individual research together. So for example, if we agree, I would, for example, take the initiative and research the cost and the time needed for a potential archaeological survey. And someone else could research other things of interest. I know there's been discussion of a pergola. There could be research into that, so that we sort of split off and research the different things of interest that we really need to report to the select board.
I think that sounds like a good plan. As we mentioned before, at a certain point, whether or not the archaeological survey is done, something will need to be put there. So we need to address that question also.
Andrew, may I ask a question about open meeting laws? can we, as individuals, not majorities, meet and as a point of information for research, can we meet and still not violate open meeting laws?
So you can have, the open meeting law prohibits a quorum of a public body. So we're a public body. Our quorum is, I guess we're 7, and the quorum then is half plus 1 is it 4?
Or, yeah.
But there, I really think, to be on the safe side, 3 is kind of effectively a quorum here. Open meeting law prohibits three members of, just to be conservative, 3 members of the working group from meeting outside of a publicly noticed meeting and deliberating about something that's under our authority, jurisdiction. So, short answer to your question, 2 people, yes. You can't have 2 people and then one person A says to person B, please tell this to person C, something like that.
Right.
But yeah, the type of thing you're talking about, 2 people go and look into this and report back, is okay.
And
Yeah,
also,
and if it's larger, you could actually designate subcommittees, but they have to take minutes and so on and post agendas, and that's
We don't want to
loathsome.
do
So,
that.
Please no.
Too
No.
Byzantine, right?
Yeah, and
So how
yeah.
can we work? How can we work James's plan within the parameters of open meeting?
well, just one quick thing to add about open meeting law. There are some exceptions for example, site visits that the entire committee or public body could all go on a specific site visit as long as they don't deliberate while they're there. So that's just one of the exceptions that's listed there. So for example, if we wanted to contact the historical society or someone to give us a tour of the site, and then that would be possible for all of us as long as we don't deliberate.
So that's all good feedback. Here's my question. We are charged with preparing a written report to go to the Board of Selectmen.
Doesn't need to be a written report, just a recommendation.
You mean it could
we
be a
just-
verbal? But
Sure.
still we would need to discuss that only in an open meeting, right?
I think it would
Definitely.
have to be approved.
The ultimate recommendation made to the select board, yes, that's something that, for a decision to be made, has to be made in open meeting.
All right, so then if people could get information, like say, how long would it take, or information about what about pergolas and what would the designer do with those, and other landscaping options, and then it all be brought to a meeting and introduced at the same time into one big tumble of information. It seems like it would be sort of unwieldy, like it would need to be written down. I don't know.
Okay, but we don't need, I don't think we need a report that's more than, a multi-page exhaustive report. You could just have an oral presentation.
Mhm.
I mean, certainly it's sometimes helpful to put things down in writing. Circulate.
How about maybe like a bulleted list, maybe? Just,
Yeah, even
sort of
just
a fact
just a
sheet.
bulleted list.
I
Okay,
think that's
so
a good idea.
we could discuss that during our next meeting.
Well, Andrew,
Uh,
what you had talked about a timeline for that sometime in April. Could you potentially clarify that? I can't remember from the last meeting. When would we want this to be, or when would we want to present before the select board?
Well, it's not going to happen on April 5th. That's the next meeting. Next meeting after that is probably not until the 26th. Because I think
And then
the
we're
19th is
into town meeting.
yeah.
We're into
meeting.
town meeting issues. There's also another thing I wanted to bring up. The agreement for this indicates that the town meeting should vote in favor of moving forward with this easement agreement at the town meeting.
You're
I-
referencing the licensing agreement?
Yeah,
Marguerite?
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Now, what happens if that doesn't pass because people have a lot of questions?
And the licensing agreement is still in place. The status, what the present situation is still in place.
Which is
The interim license agreement is still in place. So
in place, does that mean in effect? Because
in effect,
it says that it says that it requires as a condition of it
Yeah, it
that
does
it
say
be,
whereas.
that it be approved by town meeting for the
Nope.
exchange to take place.
I agree.
Oh yeah, that would be the exchange of easements,
Yes,
right? So
just worst case, what if that fails at town meeting? Because it needs a 2/3 vote, right?
that's right. Then the license agreement is still in effect. So the St. Mark's has still agreed that the town can enter, whatever is the language in the licensing agreement, the town can enter onto the land, make improvements onto the land, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But St. Mark still owns the land and then has, if it wanted to revoke the licensing agreement, it could give written notice. And then 300,
It's 300 days. right.
300 days. And then the
Yeah.
interim, the parties would meet and see if they could negotiate some other resolution. I mean, the
But at
key
no
difference.
point does it require the town voters to approve of it? From what you're saying, Andrew, it's like it's not necessary for the town voters to approve of it. I thought that it was written in that it was supposed to.
No, that's just the, okay, so the whereas clauses, those are
Mhm.
recitals. They're not binding promises. They're just,
Alright.
I should really pick it up. They're just background to understand the agreement.
So why is it going to town meeting at all if the voters don't need to vote on it? That was my,
No, so the easements, transfers of interest in land
yep,
require approval at town meeting 2/3 vote. An easement is an interest in land. And one easy, oh, I heard a background there. One easy way to think about what's an interest in land versus what's not an interest in land is it recorded at the registry of deeds? So easements are recorded at the registry of deeds. So if it passes at town meeting, there'll be another document, easement, an easement that's the town gives to St. Mark's, an easement that St. Mark's gives to the town. And then it gets signed by both sides, recorded at the registry of deeds. I think it's of infinite duration. And it's then on the registry of deeds. So anyone who has any interest in buying, selling, whatever that property knows that's on record, as opposed to this licensing agreement that is revocable. I see still a lot of confusion. It's kind of a confusing
I
topic.
know, I can, this is
Yeah.
definitely gonna be a conversation point during the town meeting. And my other questions were, I didn't see any, what are the liability issues and what are the maintenance issues? Once the town has the licensing agreement or the easement,
Yeah,
are they responsible for liability problems, insurance, maintenance? Is it
that's something
all on
that,
the
that can
town?
all be filled out, that can all be spelled out in a later
Uh-huh.
agreement as part of the easement, exchange of easements.
Okay, I think I understand that, but it just seems like I'm not sure why it's going to town meeting at all if it doesn't need to.
I mean, one thing to keep in mind is if the exchange of easements is approved, then there's no question the town has control going forward
Mhm.
of the parcel of land that we're talking about.
Okay, all right. And
I thought
also
James might have been
liability.
raising his hand there.
I think to like sort of analogize it, it's that the town has the St. Mark's School gave the town the ability to improve the land to build the road infrastructure. And what's being voted on at town meeting is the actual easement process, which is that it's sort of the town owns, or what would be a good word for that?
Yeah, it basically would have a legal status very, very close to that of being an owner. But
Yeah.
what's ironic is that the key difference would be that the owner still has to pay real estate taxes. St. Mark's doesn't pay any real estate taxes because it's tax exempt.
So
Okay.
Andrew, just to clarify, I'm looking at this document here, the reciprocal interim license agreement. You're saying that the entire first half of the first page up until now, therefore, serves no legal purpose? Because it seems to me as a layperson reading this that these are the preconditions, that each of the whereas conditions must be in place, and then, you know, points 1 through 15 can follow from that. Is that not what you read it as?
Basically, you're right. They are not binding. They're not binding promises, whereas clauses, or sometimes it's called recitals. It's just background to understand the agreement. There is in paragraph 7, the parties agree to exchange easements for use of the respective licensed properties within 30 days following the Southborough Town's meeting's approval of the same.
Mhm.
Such easements to be subject to reasonable review and approval of the properties. And if the Southborough Town meeting doesn't approve those easements, then the parties don't have to exchange the easements. Again, it's maybe,
Okay.
you know, you could have written it a little bit clearer, but clearly you're right. The intent is that the two of the whereas clauses recite that the parties agreed to swap easements, and that the grant and acceptance of those easements on the town side requires town meeting approval, and that's tentatively scheduled for the spring of 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew, is this part of our remit to discuss this? Or
Is it part of the, I mean, the charge is to make a recommendation about how to fill the unfilled, you know, circular space. So this is all, I guess, relevant background, but ultimately the charge is of the working group is to make a recommendation to the select board about that unfilled center space, which again is pretty big. And remember, the background for all that was the removal of the playground in the first draft of the plans. So that's, again, how we ended up where we are. But with that said, I don't think that all the discussions we've had about burials, etc., it's a reasonable discussion to have. I guess just the most concrete piece of information. I mean, it's helpful to know that there's 5 firms that were on a list. One seems too busy and not interested in responding. There's 4 others that could be contacted. Does this take 5 years? I heard 5 years mentioned, and I heard like 1 week mentioned. There's a big difference between those.
So
And I'm interested in learning more about that. I also just tentatively to let you know, once that statute that you just brought up, and put it through Westlaw, which is the database which shows how it's been cited elsewhere. And there, I already find there's one decision that does not, from the Supreme Judicial Court, that does not apply it as literally as it's suggested. But I want to read everything before making any tentative conclusions.
Is that the chapter 114, section 17, preservation of ancient burial
Yes.
places? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess
I'm wondering if
Oh,
you
can go.
first, Grant.
Oh, yeah. I just going off of James's, I guess, recommendations, would it be helpful to create some sort of Excel spreadsheet, perhaps, in which we all have all of our names and all the tasks that we want to complete before the next meeting, and we all assign people to contact X company in order to find out about,
I was thinking we just talked that over now.
Oh, okay.
See, to me, I think for me, the only one is how long and how for the type of archaeological survey being talked about.
I'll just go
How
ahead
long?
and
when and how much, right?
I'll go ahead and say I'll work with the Historic Society and Historic Commission with their contacts to look into that. I'll just volunteer for that out of the gate.
Okay.
I'll find a time range and a cost range.
Right. When can they do it? How long will it take and how much will it cost? All right, so having thank you very much, James, for undertaking that. The other part of the discussion tonight is after that's done, or if it's not done, whatever, once we have the piece of land, what to put in the middle of the circle or the circle with the small crescent over it.
So I'm happy to go find out some more details about the concept that had came out of our March 2nd meeting.
That's
Yeah, there's not going to be any price tag or anything on the crescent space. The more I think about it, is maybe even just recommend reserve this space for some type of marker, monument, even just plaques, something to be determined
Recognition.
in the future. Doesn't, because I'm sensitive to the fact that efforts have been made to reach out to representatives of the Nipmuc tribe. There hasn't been a response. Should we embark on make your recommendation that something should look exactly like there's had this one design theme right now? No, I guess we don't have to decide that yet. I mean, clearly it should be some type of a historical theme that's consistent with the historical walk project and makes sense given that this is adjacent to the old burial ground right in the center of town. I guess we don't need to decide that at this point, and it's something that either this working group or a different group could come together and work on that later. That just seems like that is a big issue that I don't know if we can
Yeah.
hammer out in the next couple of meetings. But
Well, it just seems
that-
also to me, Andrew, that one of the things that's become clear to me, and I don't know of anyone else's, is what your thoughts are on this, but it seems like there's not simply Native American remains there, there are probably colonial remains.
but I don't think there are.
Well,
There
either
are
way,
probably people say they're why? What evidence has I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything of. I've just heard opinions, but what are the opinions based on?
or why a dig would be needed, right?
Well, we do actually have I mean, obviously, it's our decision to make, or even the select board's decision to make, but we do have a formal recommendation in writing by the Mass.
Okay, what was that
Historical-
based on?
Based on a site
It's
survey.
okay, the MHC
I mean, they did
inventory
come
that
out
I've
with
looked
a
at,
survey.
which cites back to the Fences of Stone book, which I've looked at, and so it's some of this is just kind of circular. I don't think that I don't view the letter from the Massachusetts Historical Commission as a primary source to suggest that there are suspected burials outside there. Knowing that there was 15 years ago, using ground penetrating radar, an exploration of this exact issue, and it determined that the only unmarked burials that were found were on the other end of the cemetery.
But I'm not sure if the exact, I don't think we as a working group need to know whether or not there are burials there. We have our recommendation telling us that it's worth investigating if there are. It's not like we just came up with this out of thin air, right? We actually have it in writing from, the State Historical Commission telling us, not us, but informing the town that this should be pursued. And, so.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I don't treat that letter as a primary source about what happened. what did happen or what didn't happen. And once you get into this speculation about the location of unmarked burials in the general vicinity, I mean, other things that are in this vicinity are the townhouse, a church, parking lots, roads. So there's already been, tremendous. There apparently, there's a foundation of a structure that was there a long time ago as well. So again, I'm just coming back, respectfully, that when we say we know, or we even that statute is triggered, that this particular parcel is a site of suspected unmarked Native American graves or colonial graves, I say no, we don't know that.
Well, Mass Historical, when I called them, were pretty adamant that that letter was as close to a directive as they were empowered to do, to say, yeah, we think there's a situation there and it needs a dig, basically. It needs investigating. I mean, they were pretty clear. I think it was Ed Bell I spoke to was pretty clear that, we have sent that, and it says that we think there is reason to dig, basically.
It should also be noted that the letter itself is not claiming that there are burials there. So, but they note the potential that there is, and they made the recommendation off of the potential for them being there. So it's not, the letter is not actually claiming that they are there either. So
I think they don't know the potential. I think we don't know the potential. The people that, knowing the potential, it's we don't know what we don't know. I think if the contention is this parcel is the location of suspected unmarked burials, I don't believe that's been established.
I don't think it has
hasn't,
been
but it's-
established either, but I'm not an expert in this field, and I don't know if any of us are, but we do have an expert's opinion because we actually have a letter from the state archaeologist who is an expert. So,
But there's a difference though between the state archaeologist and the letter, the author of the Massachusetts Historical Commission, right?
Well, no, it was Ed Bell who did it was the state archaeology.
And isn't the head of the Massachusetts Historical Commission themselves an archaeologist?
well, so the letter is signed Brona Simon, executive
Yeah, she's
director.
the state archaeologist.
Oh, okay.
She is? Okay.
So I
Are
just
you
think
sure?
that we should be considering that in our discussions, and I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Well, it's like Pascal's wager. If you assume that it's there and you act accordingly, you're probably better off than if you assume that it's not there and you don't take care with it and it turns out that it is there, then you're in worse shape. So I guess the question is,
I'm sure the select board would disagree. Something with time and cost, and
Okay.
it is important to keep in mind.
but it's
I think-
also, I mean, can you get a grant to do it? Is it going to cost the town money? That's questions that I think are important to have answered. Will the state, will the state help to pay for it?
I guess my question is discussion feels a little circular. Is what should we look at? Like, what would be the question to ask to have an answer to before our next meeting? Would it be the cost, or because what I don't want to do, I obviously don't want the town to end up paying for neglecting some other responsibility. So my question is what can we do, or what can we recommend being done that would avoid liability, avoid moral liability, so we can come up with a best solution for everyone, so that we can avoid hazard if there are unmarked burials, and avoid wasting our time and money. Is there anything?
James, would you think it would work out if another member of our group investigated the options for grant funding for a dig?
I'd be fine to take that on too.
All right, it's been done in other places. How did they pay for it? And I agree. I think it would be a lot to ask for the town to do it.
I mean, I think that ties pretty heavily into the other thing, which is getting estimates. So I can also look into that. I can, I'll talk to people about potential grant funding, and I'll see what I can ask if there are any updates from St. Mike's School. I'd be happy to lead on that too.
All right, Dan, I had a question for you. Who paid for the Portsmouth dig?
City.
Okay.
I mean, it was city construction. It's under a city street. It was located during street renovation and repair.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay,
the
thanks.
city paid for it. And then they worked in partnership with Strawberry Bank, which is one of the historic nonprofits in Portsmouth, and with the Historic Commission. And I'm sure that probably some money came in from the state as well to do it. But it was spearheaded by the city.
All right.
And
Thank you. You've
and
probably
I would I would say separately that the reason why the recommendation has been made by the experts is because none of the information is there to prove it. Because documentation, 1720s, 1730s, 1760s, and 80s is so poor. Right? Land surveying, all of that, it was being done. We have property maps to show boundary lines of ownership, but you have whole populations of people that were traditionally buried outside of cemeteries, including the poor, the sick, the criminal, but also native and immigrant, right? And so, for me, I would take a look at it and say, if we're going to do a monument, we should open up the monument, right? So if we're going to look at it practically and say, what's the monument going to be? The monument should be inclusive. It shouldn't be targeting one individual group. It should be inclusive of all groups representing the history of Southborough. And I think we have memorials to dead, which are that are done excellently well. Civil War, World War I. But here I think the town has an opportunity to recognize all of the groups, especially the marginalized, that contributed to the evolution of Southborough. And that'd be my piece. But I would say the reason why the state does these things, and the state and the archaeologists are recommending this, is because, yes, you have suspicions, right? If you have a church there and you have a burial ground and you have stone walls that were there but no longer exist, right? The question is, right, take the opportunity to actually dig and find and determine. And if nothing is found, nothing is found, right? But I think that's why the state is doing this. And that's why the experts are saying this is what you should be doing. They can't tell us what we have to do, right? They don't have that was one of my first comments that I made, right? They don't have the power or the authority to tell us as a town what to do, let alone private property owners, right? But I think they're saying essentially, this needs to be investigated because of its close proximity to the old burial ground and to Pilgrim Church, right? That's why they're making the recommendation. And they would say, we don't know, right? We have maps, the maps are questionable. We have records, the records are questionable, which is why I wanted to go to the burial records. And I'm happy to look at those burial records. But it is the absence of information that drives the need to do the work, right? And this is, this is a lot of the work that, you don't know until you know. But that's what's driving this, is the need to find out. And that's the old joke, even with the big dig, right? They have warehouses full of artifacts because when they did the big dig, every single yard was of dirt was gone over. And they're still going through all of that. So that would be my, just because we can't prove it, it's because the evidence that we want isn't there. And so this is really a fact finding, looking for evidence. This is the state saying, well, let's look and see what we can find.
Would you personally be interested in doing a study of the burial records, maybe with what the Southborough Historical Commission has, to see the number of people who were recorded as buried who aren't within those stone walls? Would that?
Yeah, I mean, I would also be curious to see, looking at names and going through those records to see if there are ways to identify ethnicity as well. So I could certainly take a look at that.
I think that would be incredibly interesting and useful to know.
But I would caution that, you know, and this is, you know, I was doing work with my students looking at some of the digs going on in England with ancient Roman ruins, and it's you know, everything is proceed with caution, because you can literally drop a shovel and dig a foot down and find something. So I would just, I think for the state's position is, right, let's see what let's see the evidence, let's see if we can find evidence. Let's take the opportunity to explore and learn. And I think that's the archaeological piece.
Right, and I think that the names of people who have died in Southborough but are not in that cemetery would be very telling.
They would have to be located somewhere.
Yeah.
They would have to be interned somewhere.
Yeah. Right.
And, you know, so that's.
And was there ever in Southborough the tradition of burying people on their own property?
I would imagine so.
Yeah, I've seen that in other places, but.
But you know, I walked by the Eagle Scout project down along the back of the Reservoir Trail, you know, and there's this great anecdote about one of the Burnetts splitting with Pilgrim, you know, because he was an abolitionist and Pilgrim essentially wasn't at that point in time. You know, and I think that's an important piece that shouldn't be just kind of on a signpost out back of a suburban river trail.
Yep, good points. Good points all. So where are we? We're not going to do a written report. We do have, James is going to look at digs, cost, time frame. Dan will look at burial records and see how, that's going to be a treasure trove for sure. I would like to be responsible for talking to the library and seeing what they would like there in terms of usable spaces for story hour and so on and so forth. And I neglected to do that last week, but I wasn't here, and I think it'd be an important piece of data. So I'm willing to take that piece and bring it back and report at our next meeting. Anybody else have other thoughts? Bill, do you want to look at the accessibility situation on the plan we've got and see if there are other options besides that plan?
You're muted.
Nothing new. Sure, I'd be happy to look at it. The point is that there are lots of options. It's a question of what you don't do as opposed to what you do. And it would be probably easier from that point of view to take a look at how we, in fact, in general, want to approach the use of the property itself. The only thing I can say is that what I have heard is that the grading and slopes associated with the plan that had been presented, put forward previously, I should say, was adequate. I'd be happy to take a look to make sure that that's the case. The difficulty that has been identified is approaching the property from various locations, and that has not been addressed. In other words, we have taken a look at what we want to use this piece of property or don't want to be using this piece of property for, or the concerns of this piece of property. We haven't, and we probably haven't been asked to take a look at how this property integrates in with the rest of the community, with the rest of the properties around it. And that makes a big difference with respect to accessibility to a specific facility. I'll give you a perfect example. We built a fire department and police facility over here, our public services facility. You may or may not be aware of it, but there's no sidewalk that you can walk up to that particular property. The only way you can get to it is if you're in a wheelchair, is to dodge the fire trucks, which are coming down that particular driveway down to Route 85. In other words, I think what we did is we took a look at a facility, we built a specific facility, but we didn't take a look at how things were sited in and of the environment around it. All right, that make my case that way. I'd like to, once we just make a decision in general about how the property was to be used, I think it'd be very appropriate for us to try to talk to either Karen or the Board of Selectmen, etc., and to secure money through the Complete Streets or some other facility, a grant, so to speak, to make sure, in fact, it is joinable to the rest of the community and that people who with various types of disabilities can get access to it.
I think that sounds like something that if you could continue with good ideas like that would be very useful to hear about. The other part of it is wheelchair accessibility is one thing, but what about the visually impaired?
All of the above.
Yeah,
All of
and
the
someone at the library, one of the trustees, Amy Asdani, had said there are certain gardens you can plant that smell in a certain way where a person who's not sighted can have a really good experience of the outdoors and the garden, even if they're not able to see it. And I thought, well, why not? Wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah,
So
it is interesting. I have a friend who has various types of disabilities. This individual can smell when plants need to be watered. So there you go. There are lots of ways around it. And people use all sorts of various senses, for example, to accommodate themselves in everyday life. We want to make it, however, as easy as we can within the limitations of the law, I would think. The other observation I'd like to make is that I understand, by taking a look at this parcel of property, I understand that there are issues that may be associated with parts of this parcel or all of this parcel. It'd be interesting for us so that we can potentially make recommendations concerning how we want to use various parts of this piece of property to know how to divide it up, if in fact that is possible. Whether we need to do a complete archaeological dig right down to the back of the public library, or whether in fact there is an area that is suspect within this particular parcel that has to be more deeply examined. I don't know. If we could get to that kind of discussion or understanding, then in fact it might liberate us to take a look at how we want to use a portion of it to do various types of things, whatever that may be. And it's also possible that, in the grandest and most hopeful scheme that you could think of, that in fact there could be various uses that could be identified for various parts of this thing, and it could therefore be subsequently divided up in that sense of the term also. What I'm looking for is a compromise here that we can get to without incorporating the entire piece of property and putting this group into some sort of paralysis of without knowledge, so to speak.
Yes, I agree with that, and I think also the design that has been presented to us is probably fine. Is it the best we can do? And is this the time to think about maybe some modifications to that or whatever? And I would defer to you on that because you have the expertise. But I'm thinking, if in an ideal universe, if you could do anything with that piece of land, what would you do with it? I mean, I think that's a real question.
Well, I agree, but my point, in addition to what you've just described, my point is, what part of that piece of land are we talking about?
Mhm.
In other words, do we have to, or can we somehow subdivide this so that we can express different concerns about different parts of that particular piece of property? If it constitutes the entire thing, and as I say, if we literally have to take a backhoe and scrape it 3 inches at a time all the way down to the back door of the library to understand what this whole thing is all about, then so be it. Maybe that's what has to be done. If in fact there are other ways of approaching this thing so that we can subdivide it and then subsequently take a look at refinements about what we would want to do with various parts of that parcel, that might be an ideal way of breaking the paralysis of discussion that I sense we have going on here.
Mhm, mhm. And would that require, do you think, someone actually doing some archaeological digging? Or I think we've looked at the records, and the records are good but not convincing at this point. I think the documentation, as Dan says, is not enough to know where anything is. So does that mean we need to do an actual dig, and how much do we need to dig, and other questions? But I'm just thinking, once that is answered, what would be good there? And I mean, the DPW design from the Main Street design people, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's adequate. Are there other options we could do for the same amount of money that would bring more value to that space, and maybe combine it better with the library space? The History Walk now is going along the west side of the library parking lot as opposed to into the library parking lot, which I think is one. I was out there I think that's one change to the plan that Karen suggested, and I think it's a good change, and it just came out of a conversation of, what if we do this? And it was like, yeah, we can do that. So I think that was useful, and I think the History Walk is back on the table. So maybe there are other areas where conversations would tell us things so that we're not simply speculating. Other thoughts?
Well, I don't see why, in fact, both a history walk and, I don't know, some other mechanism or some other use of that particular property couldn't be combined. I don't see that it's an either or exclusivity associated with this sort of thing. I mean, it's certainly the history walk that we have today. I don't want to be offensive, but it has to be improved. It is not an individual with wheelchairs or with a walker or something like that really doesn't have good access to that particular facility. And it would be great if, in fact, we could give people access to that sort of thing. If, in fact, we want to make that or do that in conjunction with something we want to do with this parcel of property, that would be great. So, I mean, what can I say? It would be great to be able to incorporate an improvement or additional access, including an extension to the history walk, if that's in fact appropriate.
I think that'd be something that'd be very good to aim for.
One
Just
question I
just
had,
my feel. Great.
yeah, we've been talking earlier about funding for a dig and how much it would cost and how long it would take. One other question I had, I'm not sure if maybe Andrew knows the answer, but I guess at this point in time, or maybe even in the future, who would actually be paying for the dig? So would that also involve St. Mark's, or is this something that the town would be able to do separate from St. Mark's, or would we need St. Mark's approval? I'm not really sure how it works, so maybe you could clarify that.
I don't know. I think that once if we can get answers to the 3 questions that were talked about before, from the 4 companies that are on the list to do this, when could they do it? How long would it take, and how much money would it cost? That might inform, a discussion like that. There's a big difference between something that costs $500 and something that costs $1 million. Right?
That's true. Yeah, I was just curious if you knew the answer to that. So
Entire just.
Oh, Andrew, you're muted.
Something happened.
Okay, now I've pressed it so many times back and forth. I think so many things just for me depend upon getting answers to those questions.
Those questions.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so my job will be to talk to the library and see what they would like there. And report back at our next meeting. How's that? Kevin Miller has his hand raised.
Okay, there he goes.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Kevin, you are also muted.
Just a quick point of clarification for you in terms of the credentials of Brona Simon. She is the executive director of the Mass Historical Commission, the state historic preservation officer, and the state archaeologist, just so everybody's clear. Also, Ed Bell, Marguerite, with whom you've talked, is the senior archaeologist with the Technical Services Division. So I just want to clarify those points because some question about who Brona Simon is and on what authority she makes the recommendations, and those are her official titles.
All right, thank you for clarifying, Kevin. That's good. And she obviously, and so did Ed Bell, have enough reason to think that something should be done to find out what was there. So far we have. Bill will look at an ideal dream design for that area for disabilities.
No, wait. No, I've made the point that I can take a look at what is designed, but there are an infinite number of solutions to the problem with respect to that sort of thing. So I mean, we could launch rockets from there, as long as the sidewalk was perfectly smooth. With that, wouldn't be a problem. It gets that ridiculous if you're
All
not
right.
careful.
But you will think creatively, and then James will look at the dig, and Andrew will look at the memorial format. I will deal with the library. Dan is going to look at the burials and the lists of burials where we know where they are. And Grant, you're the only one without a task at this point. What would you like to take on?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the history walk aspect of it. So I guess I'll be looking into how we can incorporate that and make sure that it's included in the final design. If
Sounds great. Okay, that's wonderful. And I suppose you could, without violating open meeting law, talk to Bill about what would be requirements for chair and so on.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think they'll jail either of you for doing that. So
God willing. No, I'd be perfectly happy to. There are some rules and regulations concerning the way, let's say, paths are constructed by the National Park Services, for example, and how they in fact deal with people with disability. The point that I would make there is that not all paths and parks are accessible by profoundly disabled individuals, but some are, and in some way they are. And there are lots of compromises, quote unquote, that can be made with respect to a walking exhibit or whatever you would choose to call it. So I'd be perfectly happy to go through those sort of things with you if you'd like.
Also, just coming back to my piece, I don't know what I would do to make any progress on that. I really just, I can keep thinking about it, but I can't think of anything concrete I can do between now and the next meeting that'll advance that discussion.
You mean the discussion of a memorial something?
Yeah, because I don't know whether other people in the group think that that's a good idea or not. I haven't gotten that sense.
Andrew,
I think
sorry, go ahead.
I think it's a good idea to consider, and I think I think we don't have any sense on if it's a good idea or not, is because just memorial, I think if if there's like a few ideas as to what it would memorialize.
Okay.
Like because I think some kind of historical thing, it would be important. Like maybe an idea would be, I know it's been talked about, we shouldn't really appropriate Nipmuc history for our own edification, but the history of Southborough's founding, as being land part of Marlborough, how the Marlborough plantation was sort of created and then Southborough separated, would be an interesting historical monument.
Sure. Okay.
Andrew, is there any way that you could help synthesize how that parcel might be divided between purpose?
Well, what I was typing and looking at while you were talking there is how big the parcel is. And so when talking about the parcel, like the legal parcel, it's a little under an acre, 0.928.
Isn't it 3,600 square feet?
But the only, because part of the parcel is on the north side and is the St. Mark's parking lot, I'm just going to roughly estimate like 40% of this overall parcel is the triangle space that is south of the relocated street, which is what we're talking about. So it's not, let's say it's, a third of an acre or 0.4. It's, dividing it up. I mean, just conceptually, well, there's part that is near the stone wall of the cemetery. And on the existing plan, there's already a buffer of trees there. I think that's an easy call, that you can just leave those trees there. And that's an area that I don't think it makes sense to uproot the trees just to look under them to do an archaeological survey. But the rest of it is, I guess it's not that much land to divide it up into little pieces, other than, there's part which is near the relocated road. There's part to the north, which is closer to the cemetery. Then there's part which is along the Route 85. The existing plan's already kind of divided up in a little bit of way, but I don't know if what you were talking about is you might look at archaeologically part and then
I can, right,
parts.
Andrew. I'm without going into a specific discussion about exactly what goes there. The part near the cemetery, the part that is out near the newly constructed piece of road that is there, including adjoining 85 is one piece, has different. It seems to have a different ambience and feel. And then if you walk down to the library, If you walk down there further, that has a different ambience and feel also. So I could foresee kind of 3 different sections that could be used in different ways because they just seem to feel differently as you stand in that particular piece of property today. And those could be, there's certainly no more than 30 or 40 yards square, but they could literally be quite different in terms of the way they're used and the information that's communicated by that particular piece of property.
And under the existing plans, except for the unfilled circular space, that is exactly the case. There are these, gardens in this space, right? There's this crescent space that we have been talking about that could be used for another place. I guess that, you can think about another way to do it, but then that gets into redoing all the plans, and that's a whole other can of worms.
But if in fact one can't come up with a compromise that seems acceptable, intelligent to all the people, then in fact something that has been drawn up there, which it looks fine to me, but something that's drawn up there may be unacceptable to the city as a whole, and maybe shouldn't be recommended. I mean, you could take that particular piece of concrete that we're talking about putting there, and you could move it around a little bit. You could still divide that into 3 separate sections. You don't have to have large flower gardens in one area to use that particular property differently if you wanted to. You could put the historical walk into, make that join into a specific section also. That would be, let's say, not quite the example that we see here. There are lots of ways. All I'm trying to do is, without recommending or demanding anything be done specifically at this stage of the game, I'm just trying to look for how in the heck we can come up with some sort of compromise here to divide this particular piece of property up so that we can come up with at least a series of recommendations that can lead us forward into a solution here to some extent.
Yeah, I agree.
If we have to, as I say, if in fact we decide archaeologically, or someone decides on our behalf, that archaeologically we have to take everything right down to the back of the library parking lot and take it off 3 inches at a time to see what's there, then that's what we have to do. And then we better get going on that to understand how this particular piece of property can be used. And even after that's done, I strongly suspect that we're not going to have complete agreement on exactly how a single piece of property like this would be used. And therefore, the concept of dividing it up, to me, seems to be reasonable.
Okay.
So this is excellent. It's also 8:36, and and I think we all have our tasks.
We do need to set the date for the next meeting, but
Yes, let's do that. How is
April 7th, next Thursday.
works for me? If you want to do it at 7 o'clock.
Sounds good.
I'm wondering if, okay, I don't know if anyone wants to start earlier.
I have a meeting at 5 that goes 5 until 6. So,
7 works.
Do 6:30 or 7, either works for me.
okay,
Come on.
7's a little better for me. I don't know about anybody else. Dan, how about you? You've got responsibilities that.
I'm coaching till 4:30. 7 works just because it's helpful for me with family.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so let's set the next meeting April 7th at 7 p.m. How's that?
Before we do that, I'm looking right now to make sure that we can get a Zoom room.
Oh,
Great.
good for you.
Oh, there's that too.
Thank you.
Well, by just doing it during the meeting, that really
Saves us some time.
This is very
Put it
impressive that
for,
you can do you have these special skills. I know, it's really good.
everything's available right now, so I'll reserve us for the
Excellent.
same meeting
Excellent.
room. Nope,
right.
it's not available. Hold on, please just stay tight here. Okay, let me see if I shorten this. Please just hang on here. Good. I got it.
Yay.
Okay.
Okay, do we have an hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah, 7 to
Um,
11.
I'll
Please
put it
no.
7 to 9. How about that?
Okay.
That sounds excellent. All right, so we've all got our tasks, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody next time about what they've discovered. I think this will be very very telling.
See you in a week.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
that's good.
We have
Okay,
to, we have to close, right?
if we have to
Yeah.
vote to adjourn. Do I hear a
I
motion
move to adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
okay. Who moved and who seconded?
I move.
James, Bill.
James and Bill.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay. Landry, I. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Blanchard,
Aye.
Mr. Farrington,
Hi.
Mr. Sines,
All right.
Mr. Nichols Worley.
Aye.
All right, that's wonderful. All right, so have a good week. Stay busy, and looking forward to hearing what we come up with next meeting.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a
Bye.
good night.